while the government has been shut down.
We've been doing our work.
How does that work, that you are at work when the government is shut down?
Well, we had a little bit of extra money in the pot, and we just thought, we're going to keep doing what we do, you know? We work pretty well.
So we were actually talking about this backstage, and I said, does the Supreme Court have like a CFO who has managed the piggy bank well? And
I said we have a great administrative staff led by the Chief Justice, who is a fantastic manager of a really complicated but really excellent organization.
And you have had enough money in reserve to keep operating.
Yeah.
And tomorrow, actually.
I think we were going to run out tomorrow, or maybe the next day. And we were going to have to start doing a little bit of furloughing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so thank you for being here tonight. And Justice Kagan asked me to call her Elena, so I'm going to call you Elena on stage. And thank you for that. And you know, in doing my research for this interview, I was very kind of struck. You were born in April 1960. I was born in April 1960.
You're giving away my age.
I am. Well, it's kind of public. It's kind of, nobody can Google you.
I got the most in the car.
And you grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Right?
Yes. 75th and West End.
75th and West End.
Yeah, fantastic. That's my neighborhood.
It's a very different neighborhood then. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a little bit more humble.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, absolutely.
Which is, you know, it's not all that humble now.
I moved there in '84. You left there in '70.
I lived there in '77 when I went to college. Everybody thinks of me as a New Yorker, but in fact, I never lived there as an adult. So I grew up there and then left. But it was a great place to grow up. I loved growing up in New York.
So what did your parents do?
My father was a lawyer. Mm-hmm. He was as much a sort of small town lawyer as it's possible to be in New York City. Didn't work for a big law firm, sort of worked solo and represented, people wrote people's wills, and he solved their tax problems, and he represented a few small businesses. And then he started doing some real estate law for mostly tenants in New York City as New York City became, as in the 1970s, when all the buildings became co-ops. Ah. He did a lot of that work. But he did a little bit of everything. Uh-huh. And then my mother was an elementary school teacher. Mm-hmm.
And did you acquire a love of the law from your father?
You know, the truth is that I didn't think I wanted to be a lawyer, and it was it didn't seem all that interesting to me, you know? I mean, now I look back and I think about what he did, and I really appreciate it, and I see how many people he helped and why he found the job as satisfying as he did, which he did. But at the time, I thought it looked dreadfully dull. So my colleague, Justice Sotomayor, and I have talked about this because she's told this story about how when she was growing up, the first inkling that she had that she might want to be a lawyer came from she would watch Perry Mason on TV. And for those of you too young to know, Perry Mason was this great trial lawyer, and he pulled rabbits out of hats, and there were all these great climactic moments when he solved the case and made it clear who was the liar and who was the truth teller. And she watched this on TV, and she thought, I want to do that. And I said to her, boy, I knew that was not what lawyering was all about, Most lawyers in the world, they are not having Perry Mason moments, right?
So how did you get into this?
So I went to law school I became a dean of a law school.
You went to Princeton first.
So, yes, but every dean of a law school will tell you, don't go to law school if you're only going because you don't know what else to do and you want to keep your options open. But I went to law school because I didn't know what else to do and I wanted to keep my options open.
But there's this story about how you posed for your high school yearbook in a judge's robe.
Too much is made of that story.
Was that a joke, like on your father?
We were. It was this picture where we all posed in different costumes, and
really,
it didn't really have anything to do with anything.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
because it's been,
It's sort of the foundation myth,
it
right?
is a myth.
Yeah.
It's like she's wanted to be on the Supreme Court ever since she was in high school.
Yeah, well, you know, some of the things people say about you are not true.
And you went to an...
I know it will shock you to learn that sometimes the press,
we're shocked as journalists. Yeah. You went to an all-girls school, which...
In New York City.
Yeah, for you was a good experience?
Yeah, I loved my high school. It was a funny kind of high school. It was a public school, but you had to take a test to get in. It was one of these sort of special public schools. And it was all girls on top of that. And it was a place called Hunter High School. It's now co-ed. But then it was this great academic place. It was really diverse. There were people from all over New York City, all races, all religions, all different income groups, but all like smart girls. And it was cool to be a smart girl. And
Great.
And so I look back and I think, you know, that school had a lot to do with who I am and how I grew up and what became important to me.
So we have these fantastic high school students in the audience, and we've talked with them about what some of these women wanted to be when they were 16 years old. What did you want to be when you were 16?
I just told you, I didn't have a clue.
You really didn't have a clue? Okay. So you decided to go to law school, and you at some point decided that you wanted to dedicate your life to the law. And at what point...
That sounds very serious.
Well, tell us, at what point did you imagine that you could actually someday be on the Supreme Court?
No, I don't think I ever really did. I mean, because it's such a fluky lightning strike kind of thing. So I don't think anybody can really say, I'm thinking I want to be on the Supreme Court, you know? Because if you do, you're destined for a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
You know?
I would say so, yeah.
But I did I did have this wonderful experience when I was a young lawyer. I got to clerk on the Supreme Court, and that...
Thurgood Marshall.
Thurgood Marshall, and that was an amazing, amazing year for me. It's a very heady experience clerking on the Supreme Court. You've just graduated from law school, you're in your 20s, and there you are in this institution that's making all the important law and deciding all the important cases. And so for anybody, for any clerk, I think it's a real learning experience and a wonderful year in their lives. But extra special, I was clerking for Thurgood Marshall near the end of his life, not quite, and this icon of American law. And he was at a point in his life where I think he was looking back a little bit and taking stock. And so one of the things about clerking with him was we would go into his office every day, and we would talk about the cases and do our work. And then he would start telling stories, and he was the greatest storyteller that I have ever encountered. And he had a life full of stories, battling segregation, battling the Jim Crow system, encountering all kinds of violence and danger in the early years of his career. And it made you understand, what lawyers could do, what law could do. Nobody, I don't think any of us walked out thinking, I'm going to be Thurgood Marshall, because nobody could be Thurgood Marshall. But it made you think about, the value that living a life in a law could have, and think about how it is that you could, try to have a career in the law where you were doing something meaningful and helping to advance justice.
So he kind of hooked you.
He kind of hooked me.
From 2003 to 2009, Elena was the first woman dean of Harvard Law School. And you entered Harvard Law School at a time when it was really dysfunctional, didn't you?
It might be that that's a bit exaggerated, but, because Harvard Law School is a great institution, and it's always been. And so at the time that I came in, there were, incredible strengths of the school, but there were also some problems in the way people dealt with each other and the way they treated students. So, you know, I definitely had things to do there.
Well, you got a lot of praise for your management skills there, and you know, I think most of the Supreme Court justices, I may be wrong about this, but I think most of them don't have the management experience that Elena does. And I actually did a piece which I dug up in 2010, right after you moved on to the Supreme Court. And interestingly, we were talking earlier today about our late friend Joy Covey, the former CFO of Amazon, who died tragically in September. I talked to Joy back then. You knew Joy at Harvard Law School.
She was an incredible woman. One of the things that when you become a dean, everybody tells you, well, but you have to fundraise. And then it turns out that fundraising is the best part of the job, or almost, because you meet such incredible people. And I met Joy because she was a very generous donor to Harvard. And so interesting and intense.
So interesting.
Yeah, just an amazing woman.
She dropped out of high school, you know. And went on to great things. Anyway, Joy recalled, I remember talking to Joy on the phone about you, and she recalled how Kagan, the first woman to head the law school, lifted student morale there. She did her community building via small acts of kindness, flooding a lawn on campus to create an ice rink, putting out free coffee and bagels in the morning, and redesigning spaces in Harkness Commons, the Student Center. This is what Joy said about you. These were things that didn't break the bank, but said to students, we care about you and your lives.
I used to tell people that whatever I did as dean, I could, you know, hire tens of faculty, I could revamp the curriculum, I could build buildings, I could do, and that I would still be known as the free coffee dean. Because if there was like one thing that every student who went through Harvard Law School remembered, is that we put out free coffee. And, you know, students drink a lot of coffee. But, so this is one of the parts of my life that you didn't mention was I worked in the Clinton administration in the 1990s. I worked for 4 years in the Clinton White House. And do you remember how everybody said about President Clinton, well, there were all these small bore initiatives? But I was a fan of small bore initiatives, and I took that lesson from Washington, and I said, we're going to have some small bore initiatives, things that they don't break the bank, but they communicate a set of values, and they make people feel as though they're living in an institution that cares about them and cares about their concerns. So that's what I tried to do on those things. We tried to do a few bigger things too, but free coffee went a long way.
That's great. That's great. Is there any opportunity to affect culture on the Supreme Court, in the Supreme Court?
That's a jump of a question. Okay.
I think there's a transition there.
Well, the first thing is we have actually a great culture on the Supreme Court. So it was actually not like coming into an institution and going, gosh, this culture has to change. I mean, quite the opposite, that the culture is a really terrific one. And honestly, going back to how you started, you know, you see some institutions in Washington that don't work all that well. And the Supreme Court works very well, that we're 9 people, we disagree on a lot. Sometimes we express our disagreement in fairly powerful and sharp terms, but we all like each other an enormous amount. We all respect each other an enormous amount. And I think that most of us, most of the time, or really all of us most of the time, know how to disagree without being disagreeable. And so I think, you know, we believe in the good faith of each other. And that doesn't mean that, you know, we're going to be 9-0 in everything we do, but it means we function really very well as an institution, which I'm proud of, and which is a testament to all my colleagues. I mean, I'm the newbie. I walked into this institution, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And it's especially a testament to the Chief Justice, who sets the tone.
There has been over the years a debate about whether to allow cameras into the court and let people see how the Supreme Court works. And it is an institution that seems to work. So
Yeah.
What's your view of that?
Well, on the plus side, I think that would be the plus side, is we work well. I think when people come to the court and they watch us, I think it's a pretty good show. I mean, I think, and it's not just a show, it's obviously a bunch of people doing serious business. I think what they would see is 9 people who are very prepared, who are very, and who really want to get the answer right. And again, often we're going to disagree about what that means, but if you watch us, I think you're going to see 9 people who are trying really hard to figure out the cases and to figure out the right answer in the cases. And, you know, I think it would be, the upside is it would be terrific for people to see that and watch that, an institution of their government that's really working. You know, the downside is you worry that, well, it's working now, maybe cameras would change the dynamic. And I think that there is some reason to worry about that. I'm not sure that cameras have had such a great effect on the way Congress does its business. And, you know, you like to think that you would be impervious to them and nothing in your behavior would change. But I think it's a reason for some cautiousness and for a little bit of a step-by-step process in terms of opening ourselves up more to the public.
When was the first time that you went to the Supreme Court, either as a lawyer or as a spectator?
You know, I think it was, I'm not sure if I went before I started clerking there. So clerking there is...
And what year was that?
That was 1987.
Okay, so 25 years
almost,
ago.
Yeah, right.
How has the court changed in those 25 years?
Well, in some ways, it's changed not much at all. I mean, it's an institution that I think because it works, has been careful about the way it changes things. And it's an institution that's very attached to its traditions and is conservative in how it operates and the way it there has to be a really good reason to change a way of doing business at the court. And I think that's because people realize that we're doing pretty well and kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
So to the point that the court hasn't changed very much, you don't use email there, do you?
We don't to each other. You know, I obviously do to my clerks, but the justices themselves do not communicate by email.
So how do you communicate?
Well, we either talk to each other, which is not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing.
Yeah. Or we write memos to each other. And you know, you have to remember that the court is an institution where we're not horse trading, we're not bargaining, we're reasoning, and we're trying to persuade people. And often the best way to do that is by putting things down on paper in a kind of careful and deliberate way and saying, this is what I think, and giving people an opportunity to read a memo and to think about it and to reflect on it. And so we do a lot of our communicating by these I mean, it's sort of 19th century. You know, it's very heavy ivory paper. It looks like it came out of the 1800s or something. But it seems to work pretty well. And you know, when you think about it, how many emails have you sent that you wished you could take back, right?
Seriously.
So we're careful and deliberative.
The theme of the summit this year is breakthroughs in leadership. Since you moved into this position 3 years ago, is there a moment on the court that you personally or you as the court that you feel most represents that idea of a breakthrough in leadership? Maybe a breakthrough in leadership for America?
Oh gosh, you don't know. Because I really just try to do the work day by day by day. And you know, I know that there are some cases that are incredibly important and others that nobody's heard about. But for me, you know, I try to give all of them the best, most careful consideration I can. And so I would not pick out a particular case or anything like that. I just sort of try to to do the job one case at a time and to try as best I can to get it right each time out.
One question, this is my last question. One question that we discussed with these high school students is the idea that...
They were great, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, we were watching you guys. Where are you?
Inspiring. Inspiring.
We were watching you off stage. Congratulations.
You'll meet some of them
You were
tonight
terrific.
at dinner. You'll meet some of them at dinner. All of them at dinner. We were talking about how you don't have to be good at everything to be, and this is a point that Warren Buffett, who is in the audience, makes, that you don't have to know everything and be good at everything. So what are you not great at, and what are you really good at?
Well, you certainly don't have to know everything. I mean, I learn new things every day. But what am I not great at, and what am I? I think I used to think this when I was dean. That the fun part about being dean was that you did lots and lots of different things. It's actually not true of my job now, but as dean, that you did lots and lots of different things. And the key to being a good dean was that you could do them all adequately. And that's actually a kind of special talent in and of itself, right?
It is.
A certain kind of breadth in your skill set, even though you weren't the best at anything, actually. But you weren't the worst at anything either, you know? And so I used to think that, actually, that I had the capacity to do a lot of different things requiring a lot of different skills, at least okay, you know? But of course, some things better than others. And I don't know, I really, I think people grow up. There was a lot I learned about how to deal with people during those years, and which I really did not know at the beginning. And sometimes, you had to learn through pretty serious errors. So I think, it's funny because people now say, oh, Elena Kagan, she has good people skills. But that was definitely not true in large parts of my life, Like, I had to develop those skills.
Yeah.
And,
And is there any, if you left these high school girls and these women, these leaders from around the world with any piece of advice about, just kind of developing your EQ and developing your people skills, what advice would you give?
I think to just sort of constantly work on yourself and to realize that you're going to make mistakes and to try to not make them twice. So, to learn from your errors and know that you're not going to be perfect, but you can get better.
And to admit your mistakes and say, I learned from that.
But not necessarily
Next.
in this particular forum, right?
No, we like to admit mistakes here. Justice Elena Kagan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.